Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Episode 15, Education Theorist ED Hirsch.
So in this episode, I wanted to bring up some really interesting ideas that the American author and literary critic and education theorist, E.D. Hirsch.
E.D. Hirsch, yeah.
E.D. Hirsch. He brought some of these ideas up that we're going to talk about in the book I just read, Why Knowledge Matters, which if you are a teacher, maybe even if you're not a teacher, I think you should be reading this book if you're a human being. It's a great book. Even if you don't agree with Hirsch's stance educationally, I think it's well worth reading to be informed of his position, because if you disagree with it, he's probably one of the guys you got to know about. So I thought this would be interesting because a lot of what E.D. Hirsch talks about, I think, really relates to MLT and what Gordon's talking about. So, Eric, earlier you were giving me a summary of what of the debate, because I think that's a good summary to start with, and then we'll go a little deeper into it.
Yeah,
what was your summary?
So back in the 50s, 60s, there was and probably even earlier, but there's a trend toward more natural learning, like having kids discover things on their own and help them connect to the curriculum in their own way, and therefore there's more meaning for them because they're discovering and like that. But E.D. Hirsch, not a constructivist. He's anti.
Definitely not.
He doesn't want kids discovering and constructing their own learning opportunities. There's just stuff that needs to be taught. It's just like, here's some stuff, learn it, and then from there you build up knowledge and like that. But there's good arguments on both sides a little bit. But but there's certain.
I think at face value, there's really good arguments on both sides. I'm very biased in this discussion, so that'll come out, and I'll be explicit about that. But
yeah. But Gordon definitely aligns more with E.D. Hirsch than Piaget.
Yeah, and so Piaget is central to this, his theory of development. But the constructivist philosophy that was an outgrowth of Piaget's ideas, and I'm specifically talking about educational constructivism, which essentially equates to child-centered learning or discovery learning or naturalism in education. Basically, kids developmentally, they need to be discovering concepts for themselves, and part of the idea for this comes from the fact that very young kids do teach themselves a lot of things naturally. They pick up their first language naturally. They start learning the very basic number sense starts arriving naturally. But that's one part of the discussion. But really, the main three things that we want to discuss here, and this is what E.D. Hirsch talks about in his book, Why Knowledge Matters. This idea of naturalism in education, individualism in education. And also the third pillar here is that we need to be teaching general skills and not facts. And so these three things we'll touch on. But to give a base idea of how this unfolds in an actual education situation, let's say you're learning to read, and this is one of Hirsch's examples. And there's another psychologist, Daniel Willingham, who talks about this. Reading comprehension is really strongly based off of background knowledge. So if I start telling you a story that says it was spinning, it was loud, it was hot, there was a lot of rumbling, that sentence doesn't make sense until you know what the subject or the context of the sentence is. I'm talking about a washing machine, right? So giving kids reading comprehension tests who don't have enough background knowledge in the domain that they're reading about, they'll show poor performance. Or another example, you can take kids who know nothing about baseball, who have really high reading comprehension scores in general. If they read a story about baseball, they will do horrible on the reading comprehension test because they don't know anything about the game. But you can take kids with much lower assessed reading ability, make them read a story about baseball, and suddenly they seem like great readers. This has, I think, really enormous analogies with Gordon's skill learning sequence, especially when we start talking about genres of music and harmony. I think rhythm is not as much of a nasty animal as harmony is in terms of the amount of content that is required to get a handle on that. But that's this is kind of the general aim is that of Hirsch, and Hirsch goes on to explain why there's some wider cultural reasons why we all want to have the same background knowledge so we can communicate with each other. But you know, if we go back over these three pillars for a sec, um, when we're talking about music learning theory, one of the essential things that we're trying to help our students with is develop a musical vocabulary of tonal and rhythm patterns. So if we were to adopt Hirsch's viewpoint in terms of MLT, it makes total sense. Students need to by rote learn tonal patterns and rhythm patterns. Waiting for them to discover them in the wild could be a gigantic waste of time. Now, for some kids, the in the wild training is not a waste of time because their aptitude might be extremely high and their listening vocabulary might be very rich. So they're actually getting a very good bargain for what they're up to. But if you're not exposed to a rich listening vocabulary and maybe your aptitude is not as high, but we're gonna get more into aptitude in another episode. You're basically just not being exposed to musical vocabulary, and it's not a mystery why you would be, musically impoverished if that happens. Um, so to take this to an extreme, if we had this very child centered or student centered, because it doesn't have to be children, it could be adults. We had this very child centered approach to music learning, we would we would be afraid of using tonal patterns or rhythm patterns, or we'd be afraid of doing anything by rote. And this is a caricature, but it's often rolled out like this in the classroom. Teachers don't want to do anything that the child didn't immediately request. And to be fair, on the other side of the argument, we're not saying you can't teach kids songs that they request. We're not saying everything has to be done by rote. We're not saying you can't add like a Led Zeppelin or Baby Shark song once in a while if you want. But we're saying you have to have some kind of educational objective, like sequential objectives. So there's a lot there. I mean, I'd love to hear your just initial thoughts on that, and maybe some, just some of the things that come to mind.
Well, if you want kids to sing in tune, right? It's like, so where does that come from? Well, they need to listen to songs way early in life or to absorb the song. So it's like I'm choosing what would be good for them to understand or to audiate. And after they listen to it, they begin to sing it. And then for them to improve their singing, we need to improve their tonal and rhythm patterns because that's what melodies are made out of, tones and rhythms. And then I add on top of this, and you failed to mention harmonic. There's a harmonic sequence that I like to add in there too. But why would you leave them to discover stuff? There's room in a lesson for play. Just let them play. Give them some instruments and encourage them and kind of guide them around. But there's also this direct instruction that I've got work to get done to get them ready to improvise and create. And to do that, they need lots of melodies, lots of tonal patterns, lots of rhythm patterns, understanding of harmonic context. And I just, I give them this rich learning environment of stuff that they better learn, in a stepwise fashion.
So the stepwise and cumulative aspect is really important, obviously.
Yeah. So,
so I'd like to flag something you said about creativity, though. Is often in these discussions, it's very common for new teachers who are leaving teacher training programs right now. In North America and in other parts of the world, but especially right now in North America, the constructivist it goes hand in hand with teacher training. It's very common for teachers to be leaving a bachelor degree of education just fully steeped in like child-centered learning and all this kind of stuff. And often one of the reasons for this, the defense of these types of pedagogies, is that if you want to learn to be creative, you have to practice being creative, right? In a certain sense, I'm not objecting to that, but in a wider sense, it's like when we're talking about music, you can't be creative unless you have something to be creative with, i.e., you need a vocabulary. So you can't just practice improv outside of learning something to improv with. It's like a potter not having clay. Like they need something to mold. If you're and this is in science, there's the same issue. People are being guided through scientific experiments, and they're actually not being guided. They're being told to discover scientific principles on their own, assuming that this is the generalized skill of being a scientist, learning to apply the scientific method in this very abstract, non down to earth skills or knowledge way. And I see this in improvisers. I mean, there's all kinds of great improvisers. My favorite are jazz musicians, and if you go study with any of these jazz musicians, they're often just uh you know a recipiatory of knowledge. They know all these chords, they know all these licks, they know all these things. There's a lot of data in there. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And this I think this romantic escalation of creativity into the be all end all, that's it starts getting misguided when it's not connected with actual specific skills, because often what's used in defense of this is that music education, or just education at large, it should be naturalistic. The children should just be doing it on their own. We don't have to intervene much. It should be very individualistic because we value that in society, individualism. But the reason we can push education with individualism and naturalism is because everything is a generalized skill. And this is where MLT, I feel like, comes down with a bit of a hammer on this, is that it's not actually a generalized skill. Like we can say rhythm is a generalized skill, but what is rhythm? It's these sub skills of knowing how to identify macrobeats and microbeats and all these other things. They're at a specific granularity. They're all real skills. They're not just things that you go to Eric's class and he just lets you do whatever you want, and somehow you have better rhythm when you leave Eric's class, like the black box of Eric's music
Yeah.
learning classroom.
Yeah. Well, there's the experience of discovery of a rhythm pattern, right? If they're in between, you know, pre if they're it's still in pre-ideation, if they're like not quite ready, how am I helping them move to rhythm ideation? It's like there's specific things that I want to be doing, and it's first of all moving, and then expressive rhythm patterns. There's not enough expressivity that I hear ba 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 ba. I kind of like, well, where's ba 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 ba? You know,
we
with
need the yes no game for expressive playing, right? You play you can kind of do this with
yeah,
people.
yeah, you can. But I want kids, yeah, to really move and chant rhythm patterns meaningful. And that's why I like, doing goofy characters when I do some of my chants, These are grandma's glasses, and this is grandma's hat. And this is the way she folds her hands and lays them on her lap. These are grandpa's glasses, and this is grandpa's hat. And this is the way he folds his arms, just like that. Just like that. Just like that. And the kids get they crack up over that. And then I make, oh, well, Grandma didn't have her coffee today. Now Grandma's like this. Put your glasses on, please. I'm not going to give you any ice cream if you don't put your glasses on. And then Grandpa's happy. And then, the kids just buy in. So there's like it makes fun of people's moods or whatever. But what there is expression in the contrast of the timbre of my voice. But bottom line is, like, the kids are moving and chanting
Yeah.
or listening or doing the rhythm patterns from it. let's all be grandmas, ba, 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 ba. That's
For
great,
sure, for sure.
compared to ba, 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 ba. There's nothing
Yeah,
wrong with both of those things.
totally, totally. And this is where I really I like Paul Harris's framework for the way he divides a lesson into. He's talking instrumentally, but actually it could apply vocally too. But one of his pillars is character. If you're not training character expressive um, playing, you're missing out on, like, in his paradigm, 1/4 of the whole project, and if not more, because I think I would, anyone would rather listen to a performance with a couple wrong notes but perfect expression. I don't want to listen to a performance with all the right notes but no expression. I mean, that's why we don't listen to computer music unless you're playing like video games or something. That's part of the expression, is that it sounds like a computer. But I mean, that part of training is often left out. Um, I think it was Burt Ligon was talking to us about how when he took classical piano lessons, like a substantial portion of it was just his teacher telling him, "No, you got to play it more like this." Like that was the level the lesson was
Yeah,
being taught.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think
Oh,
that's rampant in university and conservatory, lessons like, well, I'm just going to teach you how I play it,
sure.
and then you mimic that. But how do you develop your own style, and like that, and then that brings us to, uh, the other guest we had.
But that brings us to Rand Blake, and one of Rand
Exactly.
Blake's suggestions to make which I really suggest people should try if you're not doing it already. In Blake's book, Primacy of the Ear, he has this in the appendix of the book. I mean, if you really want to do some crazy work with your ears, some oral. I mean, go to the appendix of that book. But in the meat of the book, he actually talks about making a playlist for the purposes of developing a style. So you're listening to a set of songs every day, just selections. You don't have to listen to the whole song. 30-second to 2-minute selections. You have like 10 of these on a playlist with some silence in between. You run this twice a day for 20 minutes for a month. The style starts getting into you somehow,
Yeah,
if you're responding to it. And I like that a
yeah,
lot. So there, but even that, I mean, that's an explicit task to develop a specific skill,
yeah. And if you don't know
and it,
exactly where you want to start, he's got a list of people everybody should probably get deep into, and that list is pretty great. I actually looked at it, and there's one in there that I didn't know well at all. I knew of,
was
but
it Connor? Is that what you're
yeah,
talking about? Oh yeah. So there was this one singer that Eric wasn't driving with. I heard all about it.
yeah, I
So
didn't know better, and I
I
went
can't
and
really.
listened to it, and it's fine. But I just get enough from Sarah Vaughan, Ella, Billy. Uh,
Oh yeah, it's just Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald. That's enough for Eric.
no, there's more. There's plenty
Yeah,
more
no,
vocalists. Al Jarreau, Diane Reeves. I can go on and
sure.
on about
I'm just
Mel
teasing.
Torme. I like to a degree, uh, uh, but
So I want to touch on how does this relate to harmonic learning sequence. So a really interesting thing you can notice is you can take a musician who is extremely skilled at playing the blues. Let's say they can play over 1 4 5 chords all day, right? But then suddenly you put them in a new musical situation where there's a function that they don't know how to play over, like the whatever you want to, flat two dominant, tritone sub or something like that, or whatever it is. You choose the function. What's really interesting is that these skills, they're not general, right? So if you know how to audiate 1 4 5 really well, it doesn't necessarily mean you can audiate other things very well. Those have to be trained. And the beast of learning harmony, I mean, one of the reasons why people are quite frankly horrible at playing jazz is there's a lot of harmonic content that has to be audiated well, and it's hard to do that on your own unless it's a full-time passion for yours of yours. But it's interesting, skill in one genre of music does not necessarily generalize to skill in another. And a lot of musicians that I know it might seem counterintuitive that there are musicians that can play a lot of genres. So you would think they just have this general ability to play in every genre, but that it's not necessarily
Yeah,
the case. Like the
yeah, I don't think Yo-Yo Ma swings yet. I haven't heard where he's really grooving swing.
even there's a quote somewhere of John Williams. John Williams, the classical guitarist, not the composer.
Yeah.
John Williams, the classical guitarist, saying that he couldn't improvise anything resembling a jazz solo if like a gun was held to his head. I'm heavily
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but it just because you have high achievement in one area doesn't mean that you have achievement in another area. And that's when we're talking about genres. What we're really talking about, there's obviously that more goes into a genre than what tonal patterns, rhythm patterns, and functions make up the genre, obviously. But skill in one set of tonal patterns does not equate to skill in another set. So these skills are more specific, and this is often the constructivist song has people really believing that skills are more generalized than they are. I mean, you can even take the same line with there's this example that's used with chess masters. I think we talked about this, and a lot of people are familiar with this. But you take a chess grandmaster, and you let them look at a chess situation that's a game halfway done. There's 20 pieces left or whatever. In a few seconds, they can almost perfectly represent the game. So you let them see the board for 3 or 5 seconds, I think it is. Then they can reproduce it perfectly. A novice can only get like a few pieces. But this is the interesting part. If you instead of taking chess pieces that were arrived at from an actual game, you just show a chess master a bunch of random pieces in random orders that wouldn't have happened from a game. Their memory is now no better than the novice because the chess master is not actually working on this generalized skill of remembering pieces. They have this vast store of previous games. So when they see, oh, this game kind of looks like that other game, this is a Roy Lopez plus one pieces off, like something like that, right? And so in music, I think we have very similar things. We have these like consistent harmonic structures, right? There's these harmonic structures that are all over the place in genres, and they they're really based off memory in a large degree. And Mozart's another great example. We don't know a lot about Mozart's composition process. There's a lot of theories out there, but we don't really know what he was doing. But we do know the guy had a damn powerful musical memory. And so a lot of these things are more memory based than just training general skills and hoping that they will just pan out for us.
Yeah.
Ear training is a great one, right? A lot of people not familiar with MLT will just think like, I'm gonna train my ears, and like, what the hell does that mean? Like, what are you actually gonna do to do this?
Who's on the roof?
There's
No, what's on top? Sorry, I messed up. What's on top of the house? Roof. Train. um, yeah, no, you need specific building blocks to get that point. Even you develop them early in life, like Mozart, or you develop them in music classes, where you're fitting together all the. You need context for tones. You need the context for rhythm. Context is so underrated in terms of what it gives you. Uh, in terms of learning anything. If you don't have
context is the container that all these memories fit into. If you don't have the context, the memories don't get filed away properly, and they're not usable.
yeah,
They're just
the
meaningless.
bridge masters or the sorry chess master. I play bridge. I
Yeah.
don't play chess, but it's the same thing. You still have uh, relation relative to whatever situation is in front of you. It's only understood, you know, in in contrast with something or similarity of something that you've experienced already. So it's either the same
That's
or
exactly what I'm
different
talking
or
about.
somewhere in between.
One, I mean, chess is another great example. There's not a direct correlation between IQ score and uh, the rating of a chess player. So what this means is it's not logical computing power that's making someone into a skilled chess player. It's more dependent on, I think Anders Ericsson in his research, and it's in the book Peak, I believe, which is really good. You should read that if you haven't. He talks about how
Who is it?
um, Anders Ericsson. He passed away a little while ago. He was the world's leading expert performers. So he was a psychologist and a researcher. But his research found something along the lines of determining how skilled someone is at chess related more to how many hours they spent studying other chess games rather than playing chess. So your skill as a chess player was not related to how much time you spent playing chess. It was more related to how much time you spent studying chess games and learning from them. And I would say the same thing is true for music. Your skill as a musician, or your achievement with your harmonic aptitude, and all the tonal and rhythm aptitude, it's more related to how much time you spent working on things and acquiring new uh, specified skills and knowledge. It's not related to how much time you just generally sung "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star." Like that doesn't necessarily improve achievement. And at the younger ages, I doubt it improves aptitude. Just hammering the same songs over and over again. But these ideas are so widespread that I think it's worth bringing up because definitely what I'm not saying, and this is what we touched on a little bit before, I'm not saying that you shouldn't respond to students' needs. Like, for example, if I'm doing tonal patterns with a kid and they just seem like they could hate nothing more than what we're doing right now, I'm open to not steamrolling them for 5 minutes with the tonal patterns, right? I'm not saying we're not taking our students' needs and opinions totally out of the equation, but it doesn't mean we're just letting them at all points totally guide the content of the lessons. I mean, as an instrumental teacher, the way that I've got around this is that I usually have half an hour lessons with a lot of the beginners, and I do 10 minutes of reviewing songs by rote that we learned before. So we just play songs that you can already play, just loosen up and start playing some music. Then I'll do 10 minutes of more, just acquiring more knowledge, new things, new patterns, new whatever it is, symbolic association, technique on the guitar, whatever. And then the last 10 minutes is just requests again. What do you want to learn by rote? And I don't get people burning out or quitting lessons or anything like that. So I definitely hold a place for, especially in music class. What song do you want to learn? I think that's an awesome part of private music lessons. Is just, especially if you can't transcribe things by ear or just pick it up by ear fast enough. I mean, yeah, teaching someone the Harry Potter song by rote goes a long way to them, sticking with music if they like it. Like,
Sure, absolutely.
yeah.
Give kids, some balance of what they need and what they want, and hopefully what they what.
Because these things aren't mutually exclusive, right?
No.
If you have a sequence curriculum or sequential objectives, no one's saying that you shouldn't take requests from kids or do these kind of projects that might not seem to have this like really conservative educational benefit, but are more free in terms of like, well, I don't know, do you want to do like a performance or like a recorded project or like make a thing with your friends or like, all that kind of stuff. But I think what's happened now is the pendulum swung so hard to the other side that a lot of people are like afraid that if they teach any knowledge, they're like the wicked vampire Russian music teacher. Sorry, Russian listeners. I don't think we have any yet, but but they think they're being unnecessarily strict, and that's not. I'm a little biased here in terms of when to do the tonal patterns. I don't do them at the start of class, which and I don't think you do, Eric. If I'm not mistaken.
I do, but I spread them throughout. Every time we finish a Dorian song, we'll do 3 tonal patterns or 4.
Sure.
Just
Yeah, but you're not half an hour lesson, 5 minutes tonal pattern, then we move on. Like you're not setting it up like that.
No.
Yeah.
No, I've gotten to the point where there's some classes where I'll do 2 or 3 sets of tonal patterns and get deep into one of them with the kids and do them individually. Sometimes it's just class, sing these, all
Sure.
together, just to reinforce tonality or reinforce the meter. I do tend to do less rhythm patterns than tonal, and I think it's because I'm weaker tonally, and I overteach what I'm weak at. And I think some people overteach what they're strong at. Um,
Well, I can see
you
that for
know,
sure.
but I tend to spend less time in rhythm because I get further with it quicker. I I
I mean, I think part of that. I'm wondering if part of that is to do with the tonal learning sequence. I think is a bigger animal than the rhythm learning sequence.
well,
There's way more possibilities.
initially, but when you get into rests and syncopations and scat jazz, I don't. This is something we should get into at some point. Is the verbal
Yeah.
association for different styles? Do today works for a lot. Uh, and you can stylize do today or do da da dita or even do bay do bobby or do bobby do bay or do bobby, any of those do ba da
Sure.
do bay I tend to take those and go into a scat every
Hmm.
especially for young mouths, ba da ba ba da ba ba da ba or ba da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba
Yeah.
ba da ba is easier than ba 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 ba, and I also think it it's easier coordination wise and also stylizes some of this stuff easier. Um, but
Hmm.
then later on, I'm expanding that vocabulary, and the way to do that is through verbal association. But when you get into swing five or you know, there's something different than ta do bait ta do bait ta. Maybe not with that one, but there's certainly ba ba do ba is not do de do de do de do de. you know,
I agree. I
it's
agree.
not due day. So you've got to scat these, but we should get deeper into that at some point.
I mean, that could be part of an like a cultural outgrowth of being in the jazz community because that is how it's actually normally done in that community. So to not do it like that could feel um it could feel like you're singing the wrong language, so to speak, right? It could feel like you're singing the French words but with an English accent. It could really just be wrong to you, and I think I'm there with that.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's a whole animal we should delve into. But yeah, no, there's certain stuff that we need to, you know, it's a package of stuff. You should learn, these 10 major songs and these 6 minor songs, and just start.
yeah, I mean, what we're getting at is having a curriculum with objectives here. This you called, and this is part of the interesting thing about Gordon and its manifestations. But if you understand how his theory works, you can make your own curriculum, but that is a very overwhelming order for anyone who's new to this. If you are not audiating these things yet and doing these things, you can learn them with the students, but to do that at the same time as having a conceptual understanding of the whole process and trying to make your own curriculum is, I think, a tall order for people who are just getting into this. That's why I highly recommend, if you are new to this, to MLT, benchmark your curriculum off of another teacher for the love of God to save your sanity. Like take Eric's book or Andy Mullen's stuff or whoever, if your piano teacher, Marilyn stuff, or we have a new guitar method apparently that's coming out that I'm pumped about. And forgive me, I don't know the authors' names. There's a few of them, but we'll have them on for sure. But benchmark, use someone else's material to take some of this instructional design load off your mind. And once you start understanding the material more, make the changes that you need to. Obviously, there's certain cases where it's a no-brainer. Okay, I need a song that has 1 and 5 chords. I know a bunch of these. I don't need Eric's songs. I got my own songs. But but um, but it
I
does
don't have
help
very many
to
of those. There's too many of those already. So
yeah, there's a lot of great Latin
yep.
tunes, 1/5 Latin tunes, and especially ones that I can't remember the name of it, but there's some cool ones that start on 5, which you might not want to lead with that, but it's interesting. You don't see it as much as songs that
Yep.
start on the 1. Um, but anyways, so you have this curriculum, and then the that things that constructivists normally talk about, bringing in play, bringing in projects, responding to the individual needs of the children, and all of that stuff. that fits into this framework that you have, right? Like, you know, if one of your students has lower aptitude, you're not going to hammer them with like stuff that's totally unrealistic for them to do. You're going to adjust the instruction for them. You're going to give them what they need in the moment, whether that's more play or whatever it is. So I'm a big fan of all of that line of reasoning and constructivism, but I don't think those arguments are strong enough to just say, well, chaos. Like, let's discover everything, and hell with curriculum and tonal patterns. And
Yeah.
is it,
Although the chaos is more for me like what happens in a baby toddler class where you're instead of singing for the children, you're listening for responses and playing off those responses. So then the children sometimes respond to each other, and that's gold, and that's chaotic because it kind of
this is an instance where I think Piaget's comments on the developmental readiness, I think, are largely overblown. I think kids can be taught things way before a lot of people think they assume they can. But what you're talking about is people learning music like it's a first language. Like, they have to be exposed to it in this way. So what you're proposing is actually defensible. It's not just chaos because I don't feel like designing a curriculum. Like, you're just doing what works.
yeah. Well, you're going into the child's world rather than trying to bring the child into yours. Like so. I think I wonder what E.D. Hirsch would say
Well,
about
see, this is
early childhood development, right?
well, yeah, but there's some things, there are some things I think the development is often with Piaget's theory. It's often thought that you can't teach kids that are 5, 6, 7, 8, how to do formal operations, which is total hogwash. You can't.
Yeah.
You absolutely can't. And this is one of the disagreements I have with, and we could get her on with Marilyn. On one of Marilyn's Lowe's material, it says something like, we should delay reading because kids aren't developmentally able to conceptualize music notation until they're 10, according to Piaget. It's total hogwash. You can teach kids symbolic association before that, but the question is, do you want to? That's a different question. But they can learn it.
Yeah, no, I have first and second graders that did true sight singing. Here's a group of patterns you've never seen before. Actually, they're the same patterns but in an unfamiliar order, and this girl ripped them off like they were nothing. It's just it's a true instance of sight reading, these patterns that are familiar, but they're out of order. Which was there's symbolic association of generalization, right?
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, and I don't mean to pick on Marilyn. I don't think it's I'm not picking on her specifically, but that idea is out there in the education world at large beyond music instruction for sure. And there's a lot of examples of it just being totally false. Like, if you're familiar with direct instruction or Zig Engelman, he's teaching his 4-year-old nephews how to do algebra, and it's written in mathematical notation. They know what they're doing. They're not being so it's very possible
if they're ready. But, that's the thing.
Well, that's actually Zig's point too. Is Engelman's point is that if you do this stuff in a very structured, sequential, and cumulative way, you can just deconstruct what they need to know before they do the next thing, and you just work it backwards enough until and you can do this with music to a large degree. If I'm going to teach kids a piece that's full of 1 chords and 5 chords and a big 2, it would make sense. Well, can they audiate 1, 5 and big 2 and in the harmonic learning sequence and then with the tonal patterns? Because if they can do those things and the rhythm patterns are within their range, you have every reason to assume they're gonna take down that song.
Yeah.
And music is interesting because we need listening vocabulary, so a lot of this stuff can just be, well, even if they're not absorbing the exact harmonic content I want them to be at this time, in a way, they're just getting listening vocabulary.
So you said big 2, which I have little 2 and 5 of 5, but big 2 works as well. But I just don't use that. Big
5 of 5, I'm a fan of. I'm not a fan of 5 of 5 of 5. That's where I draw the line. 5 of 5.
Well,
of 5,
it's easier for kids to understand the dominant of a thing that they already know that there's dominant of tonic. What's the dominant of the dominant? And then there's a dominant of that. So,
No,
and
I
it's
think
easy for kids to understand that without going into any
sure,
letters
sure.
and all that. But if I'm in, that's little two, and that's big two, and the reason I use little and big is because when you get to A7, we don't know whether that's going to little two or is that going to the double dominant, right? And it's the same sound. So if you don't already know where it's going to, well, that's big la. La, re, re, so, do. So if you don't know where it's going, you can't call it the dominant of two if it's not going to two.
Oh, for
I
sure,
mean,
for
little
sure.
two, so if it's going to D minor, if it's A7 going to
One of the benefits though, one of the
D7,
benefits of calling it of little two or big two is that you can basically do a yes no game with those
yeah,
chords. So
oh yeah,
you can put them in a song.
yeah,
And that's actually how I learned this stuff on the guitar. I learned how to play a 1-6-2-5, and then I learned this from just watching Joe Pass videos like 100 times in a row. I mean, that's like an hour long LSA. I just watched like 100 times. It was familiar patterns in familiar order.
yeah,
But I mean, his advice was just play the 1-6-2-5, and then now change the type of two chord you're playing.
yeah,
Play it
yep.
dominant, play it augmented, play whatever,
That's
and
that.
you start hearing the
It's
differences.
exactly what I do with my. I give them the experience in kindergarten and before, and then by the time they're first second grade, they can hear the difference between 1-6-2-5 and a different 1-6-2-5. And the songs I like to use is the Muffin Man, the Muffin
Oh yeah.
Man, the Muffin Man, Muffin Man. Sorry, the Muffin Man. And then what's another one? Lives on Drury Lane. And then lollipop, lollipop, ooh, lolly, 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 lollipop. Lolly, 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 lollipop. And then this little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And how that.
Now I've been trying to convince Eric to get some tritone subs in there. So play the same songs, but change 5 for flat 2. So if he starts doing this, I mean, you give it 15, maybe even 10, 15 years, there's going to be some ludicrous jazz musicians in the States. What's the hand sign going to be, Eric, for the tritone sub? Just your brain exploding?
No, it'll be a upside down 2 maybe.
Or you could do upside down. You could do like a weird thing.
A weird dominant.
Because then when you do 5 of 5,
well, the kids will tell me.
You could do tritone of
the kids will tell me. That's where I let them discover. Like, they're the ones that named uh-oh. It's like uh-oh. That's not tonic or dominant. It's something different. Uh-oh, we have a new one.
Before our constructivist listeners start chiming in here and saying, "Well, see, Eric just lets the kids figure this stuff out." No, he's got a system. He's just allowing them to name these things.
Yeah, well, I named I Don't Care. I don't care if I ever get back for its root. I don't care.
I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense.
No.
Giving it the lyric of the song there.
Yeah, it's just, it was funny. That's why it stuck.
Yeah.
And uh-oh, I said, we have something new. What do we call it? They said, well, you just said uh-oh, so let's call it uh-oh. It's like, okay, kid.
I have this one student who's a great songwriter, and he calls the 4 chord in Dorian the Spider-Man chord because it's in all the new Spider-Man movies. And I'm like, dude, if that helps your memory, use it. Just use that, because it's funny though. Like anytime we play it in class, he can't help but like summon the Spider-Man soundtrack to his mind.
It's it's
not but those little things help.
Yeah, it's big so
exactly.
So do re. That's what we would call it, but at that point we're using the tonic, dominant, subdominant names. When I only use those silly names to do 1-4-5 and 5-5 in major and minor. And once they
Yeah.
understand those functions, it's like, guys, do you think they're really called yes and no? It's like, do you
Yeah.
want to know the adult terms? Like, yeah,
Yeah, for
they
sure.
want to grow up fast, so I let them
No, that's cool.
learn the
I
terms.
think at
When
that point,
by that time they're begging. That's the thing. That's one of the things that I like to do, get children ready for learning something, and then I
hmm?
double down on getting them ready so that they're like bursting to go to the next step. If they're not bursting, then when you teach them, if you're not if it's not an aha experience for them, like, oh, I'm burdened by this, then you're ahead. You're ahead of them, and you don't want to be too
yeah.
far. You want them to be able to um, generate their own discovery while you're putting the block. It's like, here's the block,
That
and
I mean, in my mind, that's the telltale sign of a well sequenced curriculum. So the next step is basically so clear as day. You know, it's absorbable by the student. It doesn't matter who you want to. My favorite example of this is Engelman. That was brought up before. Who he's got a crazy book, Theory of Instruction. Theory of Instruction is what learning sequences in music is to just how to generally teach. It's a tome. It's an intense book. It will require a lot of reading to get a handle on. But one of the things Engelman talks about is that, and this is really interesting. You should maybe take note of this if you're listening. New material, if you want students to absorb it, generally should be 80+% um, correct on first exposure. If you're a math teacher and you're teaching a new concept, if your students at large aren't able to absorb that 80% of the time on the first exposure, it means that you gave them something that was too hard to do. Or take Eric's yes no game. If your students are not, if you're trying to yes no them with 4 functions at once, they're not going to do it very well. But if you do 1 and 5, the success rate will probably go up quite a bit. And that's the whole reason for sequencing things in a paceable way, is that you ensure that the success rate goes up. And a lot happens with student motivation and interest in a subject generally goes through the roof when they're succeeding, right? So if they're getting 80 to 90% correct all the time on these things, I mean, they generally like to do it. It's not very fun to get, you know, 2 out of 10 right every time you go to music class, but or math class for that matter. But yeah, I think what you just said is like a testament to just having the things laid out in the right order.
yeah, yeah, you dance with the kids, and
And you have to respond to the kids in terms of just the empirical knowledge. Well, hey, when I try to teach all this stuff, no one's into it, no one responds, and no one's learning a damn thing. So maybe I need to break it down more. I mean, that's what's cool about how you found this yes no game to begin with. And we've told the story quite a few times, but you were just trying to teach resting tone. Is that not true?
yeah,
And then you realize, hey, I can teach these kids what these functions sound like.
yeah. It's like Mary had a little lamb. Can't end here. Has to end here. Fleece as white as. And I found myself playing the function instead of fleece is white. I was just wanted to learn that snow and have the kids fill in the blank. Fleece is white as. All right, you sing, and sometimes they go snow, and I say, well, that's the right word, but what else are we missing? And I have them discover, you can't say fleece is white as snow. It's like fleece is white as snow. They have to
Now your
discover.
use of the word discover there is really interesting, because I mean that's not the way that constructivists are talking about discovering. You're talking about the way Engelman is. What you just did is like an inductive based teaching. You're saying something's missing here. Snow isn't right, but snow, that's right. What's different between the two? And they start to realize, well, logically, the only thing this Eric guy can be talking about that makes sense is that sound that I heard that he's calling resting tone.
Yeah.
So it's like they discovered it, but you systematically led them right to the discovery by showing them positive and negative examples, which,
Yeah, based on
right?
something, that a block that they already have, which is, they know Mary had a little lamb backwards and forwards. in their ear, but it may not have
Yeah.
gone from their ear to their voice yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
So,
because
I mean,
the other thing I do, fleece is white as, is that right? They laugh. You know, fleece is white as. Oh, I wonder what you. You know, they think that's hilarious.
I think that's actually a very undersold technique that people should be using, especially when teaching instrumental. In my experience, is like I was teaching the Harry Potter song. Kids love the song. It's so good. It's a good song in triple. It's got subdivisions. It's lovely. It's John Williams. I mean, what more could you ask for? Kids like it, and John Williams wrote it. But this one student was having problems. She kept mixing up me with fa when she was playing it, right? And then all I did is I said, okay, listen to me play it. I'm gonna play it. I'm gonna play it once with me and once with fa on this part of the song. And which one doesn't sound right? And when you just do this positive and negative examples next to each other. It's hard with music because if you were visually doing this, you can just like you can erase part of the example and draw the new example in. But music has to be listened to through time. So you have to be careful. You can't give them like a 5-minute positive example and then a 5-minute. It's got to be quick. It's got to be like, this is the negative, this is the positive, a few seconds, because they're not going to retain all that stuff unless they're, Mozart aptitude, musical memory.
Yeah,
but they hear it. They see, oh yeah, that was a much clearer like that. So some ideas on, this Why Knowledge Matters, but book. I highly recommend it. Too bad Gordon's not with us. We could pick his brain about this because I think Gordon was very very well read from what I can see. So I'm assuming he knew who Hirsch was, even though I've never heard him talk about Hirsch. But
so yeah, no, it hopefully it's valuable.
And then next time I think what we're going to do for the next podcast, because some questions around aptitude come up around what we just talked about now, because aptitude obviously comes up all the time. But we're going to have a dedicated episode more towards differences between aptitude and achievement and aptitude tests specifically, because Eric knows a ton about this stuff. And it's not something, the tests specifically aren't something I know anywhere near as much about as you do. Taken one.
Yeah, well, I took
that's about.
I took a class with Dr. Gordon on music aptitudes, and we had his textbook.
And you think his aptitude testing is his best research? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get into it's deep. We won't be able to get through all of it in 1 or 2 episodes, but we can encapsulate what we need and send people elsewhere to find out more.
Yeah, Eric's going to convince you that you should be testing your students. He's on his way to convincing me.
And then, telling you that it's not always absolutely necessary, depending on. I have room for both, but
maybe before this would be interesting. So maybe before listeners have access to the next podcast episode, is there anywhere that we can take a music aptitude test online for free, or do we have to order one? Because I have
my yes no game is Survey Monkey. I'll put a link in the notes.
Oh, your yes no game for harmonic?
Yeah,
harmonic.
Yeah, for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-olds. Some adults might.
What about adults taking this though? What's the deal with nothing wrong with that, I assume.
What's that?
Nothing wrong with an adult taking
no
harmonic
aptitude. Not at all. I just don't think there'd be much variability.
Oh, okay.
Although I'd be interested, maybe so. Maybe there would be some variability.
Unpack that a bit.
I never did it. So
what do you mean by that? So if we had 100 30-year-olds take the test, what do you think would happen?
I think that there'd be a lot of perfect scores and very few people that get less than 8 correct. So there's only answers of there are only scores of 8, 9, or 10, and I'd like to have scores of 5 and 6 even. People that can't get half of the items, which would be a chance score. So I need more variance. Need more people spread out.
You need both. You need variance on both sides of the curve, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what variance is.
But you want people getting like really low and really high, not chance.
Yeah.
You want both those things.
Yeah, I think it would be too easy for adults. I think I should do a yes, no, uh-oh, I don't care game, but then I don't know where I'm crossing over into achievement. What I do know is this yes, no game, kids can score 9 or 10 on it, even at young ages, without any
With
training,
without any training. Yeah.
with zero
Yeah.
training. And the other
It's
kids,
hard for me to.
some of my
Yeah.
kids, I taught for 3 years, yes and no. I've had them since babies or toddlers, and they're now 4 years old, and they're not
And they
getting, they
still
don't
struggle
get
with
it.
it.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't have as many students at young age range as you do. Like once in a while, I get 3 and 4 year olds on that want to play piano, but yeah, in my experience, I have a couple students who have struggled with getting 1, 4, 5 in their bones, but most of them don't. So it's hard for me to not think that it's going into achievement because my own experience with learning to audiate, more of these like secondary dominance and extended secondary dominance, it seems like you know it's achievement. Like when you get into that, it's a lot of it's just based off of what have you spent the time getting into your ear. But the fact that I can do it obviously shows that I've passed the event horizon. I can get in there. um, so we gotta get more into aptitude. I'm interested.
all right.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for joining us. See you next time.
See you next time.